Europe is facing a similar problem as Singapore, that simply we're aging population and we have a below the reproductive birth rate. So we need to get people from abroad. We need also migration. Just the challenge is to get the people in the right jobs, get them in the right region. That's a big challenge in Europe these days.
Hello and welcome to the TFC Business Show. So I'm Anthony from TFC. I'm moving away from the investing podcast and coming into small businesses. So
welcome.
Great. Finally, I get to do something else. With me is Sufyan. Sufyan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Sufyan. I run a consultancy on sales and speaking, and I'm very excited today, Anthony. We have two very esteemed guests today and we'll let them introduce themselves. So could you introduce yourselves?
I'm David Bachmann. I'm the Austrian Trade Commissioner in Singapore. Been posted here since 6 years. And enjoying the island state so far. Promoting Austrian businesses here and representing Austria on the business and economic side.
Sorry, the only thing I know about Austria is really the sound of music and the opera.
Yes, but that's a good thing, At least there's something you can build on. That's what everybody knows. Not so many people know is that we have a lot of businesses and our businesses are mostly SMEs. I mean, we have some of large ones, but mostly SME. And we have something in common with Germany, with the south of Germany, where there's a lot of Mittelstand. So those small and medium-sized companies, but they're in their sector world leaders.
Let's hear from our other guests. Could you introduce yourself?
So my name is Antonio Garcia. I'm in charge of economic and commercial and investment at the Embassy of Spain here in Singapore. I've been here for 3 years already, but I'm familiar with the region. I was posted before in Malaysia, Korea, Japan, and very happy to be here again for my second time at the Financial Coconut.
Great, now that we got the introductions out, I guess we really kind of kicked the ball. We got the ball rolling on the brands and what we want to know a little bit more about, which is you mentioned Sound of Music.
Yeah.
Right? But I think we want people to kind of like know a little bit more about the Spanish and also the Austrian markets. Just to kick things off, right? What makes the Spanish and Austrian markets attractive for Singaporean businesses to want to invest or want to venture abroad into? What do you think?
Well, first of all, we have a very similar country size population-wise as Singapore. Austria has 8.5 million inhabitants. We are an open economy like the whole EU is. And what makes it very attractive, I mean, this applies also to Spain and all the other 26 EU members, is that we have a free trade agreement between the EU and Singapore. So basically, it was concluded 2019, and as of 2024, all tariffs and customs have been abolished. So it's very easy to conclude trade between the two countries. And when you ask what makes it attractive, it's simply a stable economic environment. You have a very well functioning law system, and within the EU, many things are harmonized. So if you export to one country, you could also export to another one. And I think many Singaporeans have seen Europe only as, like you said, culturally, and you say, okay, I want to go to Spain because I like the jamón ibérico. I mean, you can talk more about that. I like to go to Austria because I want to go to Hallstatt or to see the mountains. But I think it's a bit neglected from the economic and investment side. And if you look at where innovation came from the last decades or even centuries, a lot of innovation has come, especially since the, I would say, 19th century out of Europe, and it continues like that. And a lot of components that are being built in things that are being manufactured in Asia, they do come from Europe.
So maybe just to build a bit on the single market point before we get to Spain. So is it that, let's say I import something into Austria, then that goes kind of tariff-free within the EU? So it could be sold in Germany, it could be sold
from Singapore already tariff-free into Austria or whatever other EU country. That's the free trade agreement about. So wherever you sell things, it's customs-free.
Yeah, there is no borders in European Union. Not borders for trade and no borders for the movement of people.
So once we get into either of your countries, we essentially have access to the entire European Union, essentially.
There's no woodlands in Europe.
Well, you have woodlands.
We do have woodlands. Well, since we're on this topic, maybe just to kick the conversation as well, what are some of the common brands associated with the countries? Maybe you can just do a shout out so people kind of have an idea.
I mean, Austria doesn't have so many big brands like Sweden or Spain or Germany. But we can talk about the SME landscape a bit later on. But the big brands in Austria, definitely everybody knows Swarovski. You have some stores also in quite a lot of stores in Singapore. Red Bull also, KTM, motorbikes, a lot of people know them. So just to name three of them. But the other brands, you don't know unless familiar with the specific things. So for instance, if you look at the Marina Bay area, everybody knows the Apple flagship store and, you know, the glass building. But nobody knows that the glass, it's very specific, very particular. Actually, that's Austrian glass. It's an Austrian company building glass because it's round shaped and, you know, it needs a lot of technology. But again, if you don't work in that area, you wouldn't know that this is Austrian. And just to give a second example, if you're a prisoner in Changi, you would communicate with Austrian communication systems. But very few people are prisoners in Changi. So
I would hope not to know that.
Keep it that
you
way.
hope not, right?
And you know the new system for the passport?
Yes. Yeah.
That system is also developed by a Spanish company.
So Spain is not just Zara and Real Madrid and Barcelona.
Well, it's also technology, not only fashion and food.
But let's expand that since we're on this topic. How about for some Spanish brands and companies associated?
Well, there are quite a few in the fashion business. Zara is the most popular one, but also Mango, Desigual, Bimba y Lola. You can see them in Marina Bay Sands, in
By
Orchard
the way,
Road.
it's pronounced as mango, not mango, right?
Is it?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of the businesses, those are very much established brands, right? So, let's put into the context right now. I am a Singaporean business owner. I own either a service or a product, and I want to get these services and products to Spain or Austria. What are some of the policies in place that I've encouraged this? I know you mentioned about the free trade agreement, but besides policies, what are some of the resources that I can tap into to establish myself there?
Let me start. The two of us are the best example. We are supporting our companies, of course, entering the Singaporean market. So that's why we are here with our team. And the same exists for Singapore. So you have SG Enterprise, for instance, and they support Singaporean enterprises going to Europe and supporting not only to Europe, all over the world, of course. And they support them by grants, by giving subsidies, by giving also in-person advice. We also do, although it's not our main purpose of being here, but of course, we also give advice. In principle, you could say it's an open market. You know, the EU is for Singapore open market. That's why we mentioned before the free trade agreement. You have to identify the areas you want to go, you want to sell your products, you want to invest. And then I think it's quite easy to do business in Europe, especially because it's harmonized. So the same rules apply to doing business, or let's say to exporting things to Austria, to Spain. So many Singaporeans go to Europe for holiday just to take this opportunity and, to have open eyes and say, okay, what could I do there? Which business could I establish? Well, what could I invest in?
So in general, we are very open and friendly to Singaporean companies in general, especially for big investors, of course. But we are also very supportive of the startups. We have a special program when we have some Singaporean startups coming to Europe, we are also quite supportive.
Mentioning this, I think many European companies or countries have that. We have the same thing. So once a year, we take 10 Singaporean startups and bring them to Austria and, show them the Austrian ecosystem, show them Austrian startups and trying to mingle them. And we do the same also for Austrian startups. We bring, this year it's going to be 6 startups, bringing 6 startups to Singapore, showing them, bringing them to NUS Enterprise and show them Block 71. And as I said, the same we do with Singaporean startups to Austria.
I guess as a follow-up question to that, which is, what are some of the startups or businesses that do particularly well in the two markets that you've noticed
or are
from
there
your
any
experience?
sectors that you see a bit more activity in and a bit more interest in your local market, I think?
Well, for startups, I think there are many, many sectors. Every sector in which technology is a key factor, you can have one startup. But I would say from Europe in general, maybe AI, quantum, semiconductor technology, I think they are quite popular.
I think for Austria in particular, also because next door we have the medical fair. So we have a group participation there. And I would say in particular, medical and pharmaceutical products go very well. Both ways. So there's also a lot, I would say, third of Singaporean exports to Austria are in the pharmaceutical market. Singapore invested a lot in pharmaceuticals and biomedical technology. And the second thing is mobility is also going well. Austria is within Europe, one of the centers of suppliers for the automotive industry. So if you look at all the big brands in Europe, they all have either Austrian batteries inside or light systems, But again, the car that is sold in the end is a Seat or whatever other European brand. But if you look in detail, you have products from all over Europe, from Italy, from Belgium, and that's what makes Europe, right? You can't really say anymore that's a 100% Spanish product, that's an Austrian product. And that's why we have the single market, because it's so easy to make business with each other. So you might start entering the Spanish market or the Austrian market and end up having a contract with a Swedish company in the end. And that's the nice thing in Europe.
I think, David, we forgot to mention the most important one.
What's that?
The sustainability.
Yes, of course.
Energy and climate. No?
Yes, yeah.
Austria has wonderful technology for climate protection.
So from the sounds of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? It really seems like there is a very vibrant startup, SME ecosystem within both Austria and Spain. And from there, you can pretty much access the entire European Union, right? So you don't have the Singaporean problem of a small market. You have a big market there. And I guess the follow-up point to that is really that a lot of this really sounds more like B2B businesses, right? Or being part of a supply chain where you are from Singapore, you provide some equipment or provide some parts, and then that contributes to a European supply chain. Would that be fair to say? Or are you seeing something else going on in the market?
No, I think every strategy is possible. I've seen many Singaporean companies doing business in Europe. Sometimes they provide the technology, some other times they provide the marketing, some of them the management. Many of them, they provide the capital, like your big sovereign funds. So I think all the possibilities are open.
And if you look at the statistics, I don't know how it in Spain, Antonio, but I guess it's similar that, for instance, we have 200 Austrian companies that have a subsidiary in Singapore. Whereas if you look the other way around, there are only, I would say, 3-4 Singaporean companies having a subsidiary in Austria. So maybe, Austria, or let's say Europe in general, is not seen so much from the Singaporean side as an investment hub or investment destination. That they, as said in the beginning, everybody says, oh, it's nice to be in Austria, to sit at the lake and have a Wiener Schnitzel or something like that. But business-wise, it's a bit neglected. So Singaporeans, and I completely understand also, they look in the region, it's booming in the region, Southeast Asia, it's booming. China is coming back a bit again, and East Asia especially. But for Europe, it's many people go there, but it's not for business.
What do you think causes this? Like, is it like a mindset issue? Is it policy? Is it lack of awareness?
Or is there just a very strong traditional industrial base already in Europe that there's maybe a bit less of a space for foreign businesses to enter?
But that's not the case, because in trade figures, Europe is more open than America to trade with Asia in general. I cannot agree with that image of Europe as a fortress. No, I think we are very open and friendly to trade and investment.
I think you asked for the reason, and maybe one reason is because in mindset, it's complicated, it's closed, you have so many regulations. And of course, we have the EU and the Commission and all the regulations, from the shape of the banana to the size of the light bulb. We always make fun of it, But on the other hand, having standards also helps that from one country to the other, it's the same. But of course, if you look at it from the outside, it seems like, oh, wow, they're making life difficult. But in the end, it's the aim behind it is to make life easier for everybody. And when we chatted here in the beginning, you mentioned the Channel Data Protection Act in Europe. This was introduced, I think, like 10 years ago. I would say there's one big difference between Europeans and, I would say, many Asians, that in Europe, we complain a lot. It differs a bit from country by country, but in general, we complain. And whenever there's a new policy introduced, we complain, we discuss for months, for years. But at the end, it's a compromise always, and something comes out. Also, the Data Protection Act, it was something just, for years, people were discussing, can you store my data? Can the police look at this? Can the government do that? And okay, we have the Data Protection Act in the end. And the difference in Asia is, for instance, now that as of 1st of October, every company must have a data protection officer. And the European Data Protection Act is more or less copied and put into practice in Singapore. Just the difference is you're not being asked. It's put into practice and the government says, okay, it's good for everybody, just do it. So no complaint, just put it in force. And I think when you look at our policies, again, you hear politicians from the left, from the right, from the center, everybody bringing arguments, this is good. Think about COVID, We had a big mess in Europe. Everybody was saying, this is good, this is bad. And in Asia, we just said, okay, guys, you stay at home, you get vaccinated, and once we have over 90% vaccination rate, the thing is over. So no, now you could say it's a thing brought from centuries, because here it's more about the individuum is bringing good for the community. And in Europe, it's everybody's an individuum, which dates back to the French Revolution. It's me, myself, I'm important. And it's not about my parents, grandparents, of course. It's also, it's about I'm the individuum and I matter. And I think this is behind everything, you could say, and that's why we have such a big difference in perspective, maybe.
But anyway, for Singapore, regulations shouldn't be a problem because it's very easy to communicate each other. The proof is that we just have signed an agreement, digital agreement, between the European Union and the Singapore. It was signed in July. And in this agreement, it's a kind of FTA, free trade agreement, but only focus on digital economy. And the data protection is one of the clauses of the agreement. And we have understood each other perfectly.
Maybe just to provide a bit more context, right? So before the show, we were chatting, and my impression, which seems to be mistaken, was that there really is a real compliance cost in the Europe, whether that's with GDPR, whether that's with labor protections. I think compared to maybe how we think about doing business, especially small business in Southeast Asia, Europe is a more developed environment with more protections, right? Which is obviously good for the population, but not so obviously maybe a bit of a hamstring for businesses as they look to cut costs and, especially startups where they try to be revenue generating quite quickly. So I think that was where the concern is coming from. But I think we've cleared that up quite quickly. There are routes and policies that kind of leads to these differences really maybe not being as material in practice, right? That there are ways for businesses to get around it and it's not an entire showstopper right from the beginning.
I'm very curious if Singaporean firms and companies want to expand in Spain and Austria, and based on your experience, what are some of the challenges that you find would be a little bit of a hurdle for Singaporeans or Southeast Asians in general? Is it language? Is it mindset? Is it culture? Is it how we work? Is it whether we report on time or not? What would be some of the issues that come up?
Spain language can be a problem. We are doing a lot of effort for new generations to speak English at the schools and universities, but still not 100% of the businessmen can speak English. I would say that might be the only problem.
The only problem.
So do typically Singaporean businesses, they learn the language, that's how they kind of expand further? Or they adapt?
If you go to Spain, speaking Spanish is much easier because not everyone is fluent in English. Right?
How's the case like in Austria?
Yeah, in Austria, talking language-wise, we have a language, German, which is not spoken all over the world. So, yeah, I would say English is quite common. Everybody speaks English, especially those companies active in international trade. The obstacle would be more that people might not think of Austria as a business location because as you started our conversation, it's like it's more music and culture. So it's simply the mindset, thinking of, okay, that's not a country making business with if you don't know it, so, but that's kind of our work, our role here.
Is it come and tell people Austria is great?
Yeah.
Then I think in terms of accessing the market, I think we have all been quite clear that it's quite free and quite open. But do you see a lot of joint ventures coming in? Maybe a local partner to help with localization and things like that? Or even more specifically, are there any localization requirements, right, in your countries? Do you need a local director, for instance, things like that?
No regulation. Well, now there are some specific permission for strategic sectors, like energy or banking. But apart from those sectors, you have no restriction to invest into Europe in general.
Yeah, I was saying, it's like all over the world. If you come with money, no country would say no.
That is universal language.
Yeah, same in Singapore, right? You say, well, I have some money here, I want to invest in a company, I want to start up a business. Of course, there's always then the rule or that question of, okay, if you want to settle here and really get a residence permit, it's the same in Singapore. You have to follow some rules, the same as in Europe. But in principle, if you're willing to found a company and stay there, there are ways to do it.
Okay. So since you're on the topic of setting up companies, I'm curious to know about staffing. Let's say I do set up my business over in Austria or Spain or even in the EU. What are the policies like for me to recruit or get a team down? How's that like if I want to hire people? I want to get staff?
No, we even provide the grants and subsidies when you hire technology people, or when you hire researchers, or when you are doing an R&D activity. We can provide a lot of financial support, the same as in Singapore. So, and the regulations, the labor regulations are very similar to your country.
I think the biggest obstacle at the moment is simply to get qualified people. So all over Europe in the last few years, we've opened up our labor markets to skilled workers on all different levels because, Europe is facing a similar problem as Singapore, that simply we're aging population and we have a birth rate that is below the reproductive birth rate. So we need to get people from abroad. So I would say that every time fewer checkboxes and every country has identified those sectors that they say, okay, we need workers, skilled workers in that sector or this sector. Every day it's becoming more sectors that we need people because population is getting older. Let's say in Austria, we're growing, but this is due to migration. But we need also migration. Just the challenge is to get the people in the right jobs, get them in the right region. That's a big challenge in Europe these days.
We even have the nomad visa. Do you know the nomad visa? So you are residing in Spain, living in Spain or in Europe in general, but working for a Singaporean company. You can get the visa even if you are not hired in Europe.
So some sort of temporary residency in Spain, right? Pretty much for the remote workers. So you can work remotely for any company you want in the world, but live in Spain and enjoy the cultural benefits of being in Spain. Okay, that's very interesting. Then maybe still continue on this theme of like tapping the local markets. In Singapore, obviously, you have Spring Singapore and Enterprise Singapore to try to bring Singaporean businesses out. But if there's to be a direct connection, is there any specific trade organization or function within your country that Singapore businesses should try to reach out to or look out to?
Before, the Singaporean institutions, you could contact us at the respective embassies always. And then in Austrian, for instance, if you invest, you have the ABA, Austrian Business Agency. They work similar like the EDB, right? The Economic Development Board. So if you want to invest, it's a one-stop shop. You say the area and the amount of money and the amount of people you want to have in the end, and they guide you through the administrative process. This is working pretty well. So that's from the Austrian side.
Yeah, we have similar organizations to Enterprise Singapore or EDB, and we represent this organization from Spain and Austria here in Singapore. David's office in Parkview Square, and my office is in Suntec City.
Well, hopefully people don't disturb you too much after this.
No, they're most welcome.
No. Welcome.
So basically what I'm getting a sensing that doing business, there's this mindset that if I want to do business in Europe, it's not impossible. It's not difficult. There's already policies in place and there are a lot of resources that I can tap into. You mentioned trade organizations, you mentioned a little bit of the chamber, right? So if I want to expand, I kind of know where to go. So, I guess what we need is a lot more awareness that, it's not that difficult. Maybe the mindset thing that, I can't
Maybe
expand.
it's more for us to change our mindset, right? That this is not impenetrable.
Yeah, I would say that Europe is not only for tourists, that is very attractive, of course, but it's also for business.
Think of Europe as a whole, right? What is Europe? Over 1 billion inhabitants? Over 1 billion, it's like India or China. But of course, if you look at the single countries, Austria is 8 million, Germany is 90 something million, Spain is 50 million. So each country you say, okay, it's small, but we're harmonized in our business. That's a big difference. I know there is ASEAN also, and I'm sure you're also gonna get there at ASEAN, but simply we started that process in 1957. And so it's over 50 years, and that's why we are integrated. Now, if you look at the EU, I think it's, what is the EU, 600, 700 million altogether. It's also, if you look at one country, it's bigger than the US. So it is a big market. And it's like if you make business and travel between the different US states, the 50 states, it's also easy. There's no border. And the same is in Europe. But still, people think of individual countries. And maybe we're much more different between the single countries than the US states. If we go from Alabama to Michigan, it feels still much more similar than going from Spain to Austria.
Since you're on this topic, I guess it's related to like going into the market, right? Let's say I already established, like what are the typical paths for business owners that are expanding? Like, do they start with the local area first, or from your experience, do the businesses, once they put their foot in, they're looking at every market in the EU, or do they usually grow from the localized country that they set foot in once they start?
No, they only have one establishment, and they cover the whole European market from there, because you don't have there is a full freedom of movement of trade and services and capital and even people. So you don't need to open an office in every country in Europe, just to
I
open
think there might be some
one.
localization for language and things like that.
Yeah, for certain products, the distribution is different, yes.
Now, if you look at Austria, for instance, I mean, for historical reasons, due to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy and also the fall of the wall and Iron Curtain, so Vienna is established a bit as the hub for Central and Eastern Europe. So many companies, especially after 1989, have put their Central Eastern European headquarters in Vienna. So that can be said for certain. And yeah, it still is a bit the Central European headquarters. Many multinationals are in Vienna, but they're not in Prague or Budapest, for instance. So it's a bit like Singapore, so the hub for the region. And I would say companies normally start by random. I mean, that's what I observed. By random, they have a contact with a German company, and they say, but we have a sub-supplier that is in Austria and Belgium. So, you want to make contact with them also directly. And then, and then it spreads and they say, okay, we've seen the Singaporean company. Maybe you also want to have contact with them. So, then they start exploring Europe, and they see the beauty of making business in a continent that is easy to make business with.
Yeah, I think like that's really been my biggest takeaway from this, right? Like in Singapore, at least, we see Malaysia, Indonesia as a very traditional hinterland. But of course, they are developing economies with problems of developing economies, right? Whereas Europe is a bit further away. There'll be a lot more logistical challenges around time differences and maybe a bit of language. But Malaysia and Indonesia have language issues as well, right? But then you get the benefit of a developed economy. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You have big markets there. It's just the risk that a business thinks that they're equipped to navigate, right? And then that might influence the selection of the market that you want to sell into.
Just for the sake of the viewers, if let's say we wanted to expand to Europe, we are not going to say it's a broad strokes that every state will be the same or every business will do well in every kind of country. So in general, what industries tend to do better in your countries and even the other countries in EU from your sensing?
Well, maybe everything that is green and sustainable, and especially green energy. That's a sector in which Europe is very well developed, but there are also some Singaporean companies with a nice technology to work in Europe.
Yeah, I think Capo has had a few quite big investments over the past few years into Europe, and a few Chinese entities have started building factories and then investing there as well.
Yeah, but you could say, for instance, if you look at Europe, could say, I don't know, cars, it's France, Germany, Spain. But also, as I said, the sub-suppliers then come from the smaller countries, and they might come from Austria, Netherlands, or whatever. But I mean, it's...
Yeah, they are very fully integrated economies. So,
I mean, think of Spain, textiles, definitely something. If you ask me, Spain would say textiles, I don't know, if you look at renewable energy, I would say Austria is definitely one of the players. In Europe, everything is very much interlinked.
Even the agri-food industry is very well diversified, all countries in Europe. And you can find very good wine in France, but also in Austria and in Spain.
Yeah, that's really what I'm getting from this conversation. It's not one particular country that has ownership of just one kind of industrial sector. It's very complex, diverse. Everyone's involved in the different sectors. Yeah, so good news for any business that wants to expand the EU.
I mean, look at one company that is very large in Singapore, Airbus, for instance. That's a real European company. Although they're based in Toulouse and the headquarters is there, they get parts from all over Europe, literally. It's also parts from Austria. You have the outside aluminium. It's a big Austrian company producing that. I don't know what comes from Spain. Definitely the product from Spain going there. So, so that's really the classical example of a big European company economy being successful and bringing all European businesses together. And this comes from the fact that in Europe, we've been working on integration for decades. And that's why we have this regulation. It will say, okay, and if you produce a plug, it must have exactly this and that size, because then you can use it in Belgium, the same as in Sweden, as everywhere else.
And then that's why Apple needs to have USB-C, which is great.
Yes, because here, just been to Indonesia, then it's, oh no, I got the wrong plug. Oh no, can I get a plug? Oh no, we don't have it here now. So, and especially it comes to industry, okay, if you produce that, you can make the same thing in Sweden. That's why you don't need to negotiate on certain things. I mean, in Europe, we complain a lot about Brussels. It's always, Brussels, all the bureaucrats in Brussels, what they're doing there. Tens of thousands are working there, but they're doing their job, doing the job of integrating Europe, of bringing everything together. And that's why, imagining traveling from here to Malaysia, say Penang, whatever, not having to show anything, not even electronic, they're just traveling through, and in Malaysia you put in the same plug, although I think in Malaysia it is the same plug as in Singapore, right? But not worrying about industry standards.
You don't need a passport. You don't need to take your passport, just your
You
ID.
don't even need to scan that fingerprint or scan the passport. Just go straight through. One last question, if not, or if there's anything you want to say about bringing European business into Singapore, feel free, the floor is yours.
Or what would you advise Singaporeans or Singaporean firms that want to do business in your respective countries? What would be your tip or advice for them?
Well, I would advise you to visit Europe.
and not just the touristy part.
No. And not only the touristic part.
Or come to the fairs. Both of our countries have a lot of group participations at trade fairs. The neighboring medical fair, we have at the Food Hotel Asia. There's so many fairs with European companies. Just, go there, talk to them, see what potentially you have as a supplier or as a buyer. I would say we're present in the market. We are here for a reason. And talk to us, talk to the companies that we bring, and see what's going on. Travel-wise, we have so many connections. We don't have a direct flight to Vienna. I hope this is going to happen one day soon, but still within 15 hours you're in Vienna. I don't know how much it takes to Spain, maybe 1 or 2 hours longer, but it's not out of reach. I think you get faster to Europe than you get to the US. Okay, at least if you say, okay, the West Coast, maybe LA. But still, LA, I think it's 15 hours or something like that?
I think it's more than that. I think even Singapore, New York direct is 24. So you can go to Berlin or something within 12, if I'm not wrong. And then that's direct flight. And it's open borders, right? So just drive straight through Austria.
And don't forget, there's a free trade agreement within the two countries. That means something. Yeah.
I think we've got so much information and insight. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, David. Right. Thank you so much, Antonio, for being our guest on this show.
Thank you. See you.
See you guys. Bye.
See you.
See you.
Bye.